Here.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Here.
Mrs. Blair.
Here.
Mr. Buckmaster.
Here.
Mrs. Boyer.
Here.
Mr. Hyde.
Here.
And I'm here. We are all present.
We have 7 present. We have a quorum for action. Moving on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please rise, move your cover, and join Laura Cotney in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Lori. Moving on to item 1E, approval of the agenda. Motion is in order to approve the agenda before us.
So moved.
Second.
Kevin gets the second.
So
No problem.
it was Terry, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved as is before us. Moving on to item 2, consent agenda. Motion is in order to approve the consent agenda in gross.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or individual item a board member wishes to remove for individual consideration?
No, I just appreciate that you put the stuff in about what I
Thank you.
asked.
Yes.
So thank you.
You bet. Going once? Twice? Hearing none. All those in favor state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda is approved and gross. Moving on to item 3, superintendent's report. Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here on behalf of Dr. Thompson, who is vacationing with her family, well deserved. The very first item is to celebrate and recognize our girls soccer team. We are excited to invite our girls soccer team members and the coaches to this evening's board meeting. This past season, they proved once again that putting forward incredible effort, demonstrating positive leadership, and working collectively toward the same goal, they can accomplish, quite honestly, anything. Tonight, we would like to recognize our players and coaches for winning another state championship in Division I soccer. This is the second time in 4 years that our team has come out on top and secured a state championship, and that's considering that one of those 4 seasons was canceled due to COVID. At this time, we would ask that the players and coaches come forward to be recognized by the board. And when you come forward, if you just want to kind of stand in this U shape, that would be perfect. Thank you.
I do too. You doing, coaches? Good? Doing good. Yeah. So usually, I'll take one, and then I'll read one, and then, because they're all the same. So I'm gonna read one certificate, right, because they're the same, and then we'll call out each name, right, and you can come and get your certificate, okay? So I should do it like this, so, we're good? So, Certificate of Appreciation. The Muskego Norway School Board presents this certificate in grateful recognition of Ella Credeville for her contribution to the Muskego High School soccer team, achieving the exceptionally high honor of being the Classic 8 Conference champions and placing first in the Division I WIAA State Championship. The Muskego Norway School Board commends Ella for her perseverance, team spirit, and commitment to excellence in the sport of soccer, which has brought honor to herself, her family, the Muskego Norway schools, and her community. The Muskego Norway School Board wishes Ella success in her future education and career endeavors, and it's presented this day and signed by the officers of the school board. Ella. We're just gonna sort through this now.
And Zora's not.
Kenzora's right here. She's hiding behind me.
Sorry.
That's not the yellow, that was.
No, we got like 4 of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're not.
Just wait, Ellen.
Wait,
Okay, so it's
Bella, she's here.
Bella Zuki, right?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Jess is here, yep.
And Jess Hine. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Taylor?
Oh,
Congratulations. Jordan? Congratulations.
Sophia was not. And,
Jess?
Yep.
and what about Carly?
She's here.
Carly?
Which one?
Anna?
Anna's not here. Billy Boham not here.
We're just sorting through all this. Okay.
Okay, take those two. Who's the next?
And Maddie? Not here. Lily?
Here.
Miss Talia?
Yes.
Natalia?
Clara, that's here.
Okay. And Clara?
What about Ashley?
She's here.
Go.
Ashley?
Maggie's
Congratulations. Maggie? Amanda? Haley Johnson?
No,
No.
but Ashley can probably take it.
Oh,
yeah, I
sister,
can take it.
really?
Yeah.
She's in California.
She is.
Well, congratulations.
She's here.
Nora?
I'm just kidding, she's here.
Eddie? Edie.
The last one should be Autumn Day, who's not here.
Ella? That would be it for the first one.
Good.
Yep, and then
Yeah.
usually take a, so, and then.
After the coaches?
Right, and then we'll do the coaches now, and then we'll do a photo, and then if you wanna say anything.
I'm good.
We'll give you, we'll give you your awards, and if you wanna say anything,
Okay.
and then we'll take the photos after, okay?
Thank you.
Is that good?
Yeah.
All right, so this is for the coaches. Okay, so certificate of appreciation. The Muskego Norway School Board hereby congratulates Coach Lance Matthews for an outstanding season culminating in the Muskego High School girls soccer team being named Classic 8 Conference Champions and achieving the high honor of Division I WIAA State Championship. The Muskego Norway School Board commends Coach Lance Matthews for his leadership, dedication, and perseverance in the sport of soccer that has brought honor to himself, his family, and the Muskego Norway schools and community. Presented to this day and signed by the officers of the school board. Thank you. Ben. Ben, congratulations. Courtney.
Yes.
So, is there anything you coaches would like to say or summarize about your season?
No, just really appreciate the recognition from the school board and the community. The support has been incredible. Just a really fun way to cap off the season, so really appreciate everything.
Well, the community certainly followed you. I mean, it was just an awesome experience to read and follow your success, so thank you all very much. Yep.
All right.
Are we U-shaped in the picture?
Do you have like a formation where you go like you're...
Yeah, do like the 2 rows.
That would be good, thank you. Okay, sit down. Yeah, you realize I never pick it up again, right?
You're bleeding. Oh.
Thank you, congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks.
I got a nerd, I definitely
You don't have to say it, right? Yeah, thank you. You as well.
I already know it. Okay.
All right. So the second agenda item is sportsmanship awards. Winning state championships, such as what we just celebrated with the girls soccer team, is something that all coaches and players in schools really attempt to achieve every season. And sometimes what goes overlooked by many is sportsmanship. Good sportsmanship often is a reflection of the character of a team, the leadership of our players, and the modeling of our coaches. This evening, we are happy to announce that the following spring season athletics teams are recipients of the Classic 8 Sportsmanship Award. That is boys tennis, boys golf, girls soccer, and our girls track and field team. Congratulations to those athletes, coaches, and Muskego High School for that accomplishment. So the third item on the superintendent report is our student services report. Annually, every district across the state is responsible for submitting a report around seclusion and restraint. Linked in board docs, you will see data from this past school year. Presenting that information this evening is Kari Olson, our former Director of Student Services for our district, who, as you know, concluded her time with us on June 30th, prior to taking on a regional role at CISA 1. Kari, we welcome you back, and I believe you have Tracy Stodecker here, our district nurse, with you, who will also be presenting some information.
I do, and thank you. I appreciate the honor of allowing me to return to share some information about the 21-22 school year in regards to seclusion and restraint. On March 2nd, Act 118 was passed. That is the new and updated seclusion and restraint law. Prior to that, it was Act 125, and I'm going to walk you through our current seclusion and restraint incidences, as well as some changes that occurred within the law. Okay, so the requirements of Act 118 are that on an annual basis, the designee, which is was me in the 21-22 school year, was required to submit a report containing the following information. This report needed to occur at a board meeting prior to October 1st. However, we wanted to provide that at an earlier date. So we need to provide our community, as well as the state of Wisconsin, the Department of Public Instruction, with the total number of seclusion and restraint events, and I will define what that means for you in a moment, from the prior school year. In addition, we need to provide the total number of students involved in seclusion and restraint events, and the total number of students with disabilities that were involved in those events. Seclusion and restraint, as they are defined, seclusion refers to an involuntary confinement of a student apart from other students in a room or area from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. The only reason that a student would ever be secluded is if they are in imminent danger of harming themselves or somebody else. A restraint refers to a restriction that immobilizes or reduces the ability of a student to freely move his or her torso, arms, legs, or head. We actively ensure that our students are, our staff are properly trained in safe measures to put kids in a protective hold. So if they are in imminent danger of harming themselves or somebody else, we make sure that those students are properly held in a way that is protective and keeps them safe and the people around them safe. In Muskego Norway School District, we have a high level of staff training. So by law, each school is required to have a minimum of one person trained in crisis prevention intervention. Currently in Muskego Norway School District, we have approximately 180 staff members trained. Those trainings were put on hold during the pandemic. So during the 21-22 school year, we went about resuming those trainings to ensure that our certification renewals are consistent with the district's expectation. The district's expectation for those renewals is that every staff person who would be allowed to participate in a seclusion or restraint event has recertification every 3 years. That is far above the industry standard. We also expect that any staff person who works in the special education or student services department is trained within 1 year of membership within that department. And so the individuals who are trained are all of our special education case managers, all of our therapists, so that would include speech and language therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, all of our educational instructional assistants, otherwise known as special education paraprofessionals, so if that term is more familiar to you. And then in addition to that, all of our school psychologists and social workers, as well as our school resource officers. Now, it's important to note that our school resource officers are trained under a separate set of seclusion and restraint guidance, but we make sure that we train them in the crisis prevention intervention process, because there are a tremendous amount of de-escalation tactics, and we want to make sure that they have all the tools available to them, not only through a law enforcement perspective, but also through a school official perspective. So we want to make sure that they have all of the information they need to serve our students. Also, we have members of crisis prevention teams within each of our buildings, and our building principals designate who those individuals are. And so they make sure that those individuals that would be responding to a crisis incident within a school are trained in crisis prevention intervention. And again, seclusion and restraint is one very tiny portion of that training, important portion of that training, because we want to make sure that people are acting in accordance with the laws, rules, and regulations that govern us and related to that, but also the emphasis on that training is significantly around the de-escalation tactics, so that if a child is feeling dysregulated, or we're starting to see signs of physical aggression, or a situation in which we'd have to remove that child from a situation to protect them, that we have some other resources and opportunities, some other strategies to help them re-regulate and get to a state of regulation prior to a seclusion or restraint event. So our incidence of seclusion and restraint, I've given you a 5-year trend. This is not required by law, but I did want to give you some context to what our seclusion and restraint looks like from a trend perspective. So you will note that in 21-22, we saw an increase in the volume of seclusion and restraint events. You'll note that the last time that we had that volume of seclusion and restraint events was in this 2017-18 school year. So one might ask themselves, what contributed to that? So there's some important factors for you to note. As of March 3rd, 2020, when Act 118 went into place, the district is now required to report out seclusion and restraint events that occur with students that are their students, but are placed in an alternative setting because that child is having a difficult time emotionally regulating and requires a different setting to meet their needs so that they can be supported appropriately and be successful and learn some strategies and then be returned to our district so that they are able to maintain their own safety and also that we're able to maintain the safety of other students. So we had, of course, received for the first time this school year those seclusion and restraint events that occurred in the 21-22 school year for our students who are placed in alternative settings. It's an awesome accountability measure that we're needing to report back to the state because we need to be transparent about when those things occur. It's also important for you to note that if ever a child is secluded or restrained within our district or outside of our district, that we are obligated under the law to provide the parents with a very clearly articulated report that outlines what occurred prior to the event, what occurred during the event, and what occurred following the event. In addition to that, with the enactment of Act 118, school districts are required to get together and process any event where a child is secluded or restrained, and those, the team members in that processing need to include any person involved in the seclusion and restraint. We also, as a district, have selected that we are going to have our student services personnel who are experts in the area of de-escalation tactics as well as emotional regulation strategies present, so that as the team processes what occurred, they can really thoughtfully make a plan designated to ensure that those things don't occur going forward and that they are putting positive behavioral supports into place for these children when that occurs. In addition to that, with the enactment of Act 118, it was required that any child who has an IEP that has been secluded or restrained following 2 of those events, the IEP team needs to come together and consider, again, positive behavioral interventions and supports that may need to go into that child's individualized education plan to ensure that that child is being successful and that the adults surrounding that child are putting those supports into place so that they can have a better experience in implementing those strategies around emotional regulation. So we had 109 seclusion and restraint events in the previous school year. The number of students involved in those events were 8. The number of students with disabilities involved in those were 8. So you will note that all of the students who are involved in seclusion and restraint events were children with IEPs.
Kari, would it be okay to ask you a question now, or would you rather I wait until after you're done?
You're welcome to ask now.
So, thank you. On your point on when the IEP team has to meet after multiple events, right? So
After 2, yep.
2. So at what point is PBIS just not gonna help?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of our schools are PBIS schools, so they have universal positive behavioral support interventions in place for kids who make, a poor judgment or they don't follow one of the rules. And it's just a very supportive corrective plan to help kids to learn what are school appropriate behaviors. Within the PBIS, there's a tier 2. Tier 2 is a more targeted intervention so that students would be receiving some re-instruction around how do I follow school rules, what should I be doing. Tier 3 is an even more intensive targeted instruction that tends to be with the student services personnel, who's really doing some training around behavioral response and intervention. When a child qualifies for special education services and are demonstrating behaviors that are to the level of which they are in imminent danger of harming themselves or somebody else, that is when we activate the seclusion or restraint response. Again, we are putting all of those positive behavioral supports in place first. We're doing all that tiered intervention first. They're receiving specially designed instruction around the emotional regulation strategies. They're getting coaching, they're getting support for implementation, and yet these children are still having a difficult time maintaining their safety. And so at that point, that's when we're engaging in the seclusion and restraint. So all of those interventions are in place prior. And it is we have over 5,000 students in our district. And if you consider the fact that we have these situations with 8 of our students, that's a really nominal number of students. Not to say that it's not important, it is important, but these are children who need something very significantly different. And also it's important to know that the district is obligated and committed to making sure that if these children are not yet able to regulate themselves and they are in imminent danger of harming themselves, which would be horrible, or somebody else, we absolutely make sure that we provide them with settings that meet their needs. So sometimes these kiddos are not in our hallways because they do need something so significantly different. And so we provide that as a service to them until they're able to develop those skills and strategies to regulate themselves.
So, thank you, and that's
Yeah.
really good. I do have a follow-up, and it's gonna put you on the spot. I'm
No
really
problem.
sorry, but it's actually a softball one.
It's
kind
okay.
of. So we've got 5,000 students.
Yep.
But we have 10,000 parents.
Yep.
So what about if the parent needs some PBIS?
So that's a great
I
question.
mean, it's not, I mean, what if I'm a parent and I have a boy that just, no way, my son would never act like that, ever, ever, ever.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, do we have resources for parents too?
We do, and you know, Chris, it is so, like, as a parent myself, one of the things that, like, when I come to the table with a parent, and I'm sitting across the table and their child is not being successful, I know their heart is breaking. I know that it is painful, and you know, every parent wants their child to be successful. So we as a district have put together some resources and tools to support our parents. So Deanna Welch, who is one of our crisis prevention intervention trainers, is also a certified love and logic trainer, and she puts on multiple opportunities throughout the year for families to come and learn strategies to help their children understand healthy boundaries and to help parents set those healthy boundaries, because what we do know is when kids are dysregulated, they need to know that the adults around them are strong enough to set limits so that they know that the adults around them are strong enough to protect them when things get hard. We also have trauma-informed practice training in place for our teachers, so that our teachers know that we have kids who come to us who have had difficult histories, and so we make sure that those staff are informed in their practices so that they're able to meet the needs of those kiddos. We provide those trainings as well to our parents. And so there's a multitude of opportunities to provide parents with tools, skills, and strategies necessary. We also have membership with Parents United, which is a network of school districts that contract with individuals like therapists. And they come together and provide free workshops to our families around things like, how do I support my child if they have anxiety or depression, or if my child has ADHD, or if my child has a difficult time managing their anger. So they provide these workshops free of charge to our families. And the district communicates regularly. So in August, the district families will be receiving communication about some of those workshop opportunities, again free. And please, any of you who are interested, or you have families who might be interested in it, it is free. They do request registration so they know the number of participants. Many of them are virtual offerings. Please get the word out. We would prefer families to be involved in that, so.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I have two questions.
Yes.
So number one, you mentioned trauma-informed care with the IEPs. Do they survey out the ACEs of what those kids are going through adverse?
Yep, so we are currently not using ACEs as a survey, but that is something that the district has, they're aware of. We have not implemented that yet.
Okay. And second, you mentioned the 109 are not all within the district. There are some that are out. What's the number for the district?
So I can get that information to you,
Okay.
Tracy. I don't have that in just like off the top of my head, but it is 8 students. And so it's 109 events, and I can get that to you.
But they're not on campus.
Not all of them are.
No, so, I mean, roughly, do you have a number? Do you think it's half, or?
I don't wanna give you bad information.
that's fine.
Yeah,
Just-
I put these slides together like 2 weeks ago, and I don't wanna give bad information, but I'm happy to give that to you.
Okay.
Yes,
Because I mean, it makes a somewhat difference if it's 10 versus 100.
correct,
You know what I mean?
correct.
All right.
Okay, I'll carry on. Are there any questions? See, you just like got ahead of me, that's it.
I knew that slide was kind of coming up, I just
Right.
would lose
You
my
were
train
like-
of thought, so.
Yeah, you're like a
Terry,
vision.
the group that we contract with, the in-house counseling group, so I know they had a waiting list last year, and I think, because you and I had talked about that, they might have been expanding or adding?
Sure. So what Mrs. Boyer is responding to is we have an on-site mental health clinic. They are not a member of our district, but they provide free on-site, I shouldn't say free. They provide mental health services to our students. So as a district, we provide school-based mental health services. This is a clinically based or community-based mental health service. And so families are able to say, I would like my child to see a therapist. The therapist is not allowed to share any information with the school without permission from the parents. So it is truly like a community-based therapist. They simply are allowed to use our space, and we have a memorandum of understanding that allows that. A lot of our families were very interested in that and really truly benefited from that. And what happened is we found that many families were so interested in that we ended up with a waiting list. And so we were very fortunate to be able to work with Psychology Associates, and they are increasing the number of therapists available to us in our schools. In addition, we were only at the high school as well as the middle school. We are now able to offer those services in our elementary schools. Again, that is a parent permissed thing. That is not something that we would do without parent permission. And there are a number of consent forms that need to be signed by the family. And we do remain separate unless the parents give us permission to have that information, just like we would do with any community-based therapist.
So there was 2, so how many did we increase it to?
There were 2 at the high school.
That's probably where I was looking.
Yeah, and they have increased, it was 2 part-time, they've increased it to full-time. And we are hoping to increase that even more. They are in the process of doing some hiring for us right now. Thank you for the question.
I have a question.
I'm not sure that I'm able, I apologize, I'm so sorry.
You have to wait.
I don't know.
Oh,
So, if you could hold off on that a second, Barb, okay? Is there any questions from the board?
Yeah, I've got,
Brett?
hey, Kari, good to have you back, even for today.
Glad to be here.
For one meeting.
Are seclusion and restraints, any part of a criteria for, placing students in these schools outside of our district?
It is truly an IEP team decision, but the bottom line is, we have to look at what the child's needs are, and if we're able to meet them within our hallways and within our schools, whatever those needs are, that is our default, that's what we want to do. But in very rare circumstances, we find ourselves in a situation where we're not able to create the environment that the child needs to be successful while they're developing their skills, or we're just not able to meet that specific student's needs. And so then we have an obligation to contract with an alternative setting that can meet their needs. And that is a conversation with the parent, and of course with the IEP team, which includes the family.
And what I mean is just if the only issue is that they need to be secluded or restrained. And if there's other issues, obviously, that very often they go hand in hand, but are there any incidents where it's just that we're having to restrain the student on a regular?
No.
Okay.
No, because if we're able to put that child in a protective hold, protect their safety, and then get them back to a place of regulation and continue to work on those strategies, that is our ultimate goal, is to continue to maintain them within our hallways and within our schools.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
None from the board? So, being that this is the superintendent's report, I can open it up. Barb, did you have a question?
I'm just wondering when, what you do when the kids don't want to learn. They don't want to learn, they flip the desk, they attack the teachers, they're taken off to the principal's office, they have to play video games. How does this affect the other kids in those classrooms when they see someone getting not to do what they have to do? Is that going to affect them at all?
So when we look at, it's very difficult for me to speak to a global question like that, because truly, we need to look at each individual circumstance, and we need to look at what caused that child to react that way. What we do know to be an absolute fact is that children do well if they can. So if they have the skills and the resources and the knowledge to do what is right, that we are hardwired as human beings to do what is right and good. But we need to have those skills and strategies. And so if a child doesn't have those things, we put a number of interventions in place prior to make sure that we're able to prepare them for that. If a situation becomes to the level of being unsafe for other students, again, that's where we're considering what is imminent danger for that child and for other children. And so we do enact procedures and practices to keep the other students safe. And so that's what I can speak to in a global.
I'm just wondering how it affects the other
Yep.
psychology of the kids that see kids getting away with things and getting a treat or a perk because they're misbehaving. And how does that affect the rest of the class that, is obeying the rules, doing what they're supposed to do?
So I'm challenged by the statement of a child would get a treat or a perk for misbehaving. One of the things that we're very thoughtful about is that we have a wide variety of students that we're serving who come to us with different skill sets. And we are making sure that we are individualizing our responses to those kids. And so if a child is dysregulated, that is a very scary and difficult place for a child to be. It is a very hard place for a young person to be. If you think about your own self, think about a time in your life where you were extremely afraid and you were in a state of extreme emotional dysregulation. We want to make sure that not only are we protecting all of our students, which we do, we also want to make sure that we're responding to the child who has had that experience in a way that helps them to recover and develop strategies, because we are educators and we are all about helping kids learn and how to engage in positive responses to stress and difficulty. And so how we go about responding to that child is really individualized to each child, but not at the deficit of our other students. So like I have 3 kids myself, and I want to make sure that my children are safe and experiencing positivity in their learning environment, with the understanding that my kids have a great set of social skills and a great set of life skills, but that they are in classrooms with other kids who might not have that skill set. And so we need to make sure that how we respond to each child is helping them to grow and recover.
That's true, but when the acting up happens in the classroom, all the kids in that classroom are exposed to that behavior.
We'll need to move on though, or,
Okay.
sorry,
Okay.
but, yeah, so are there any other questions at all on specific to seclusion and restraint? Okay, good, Jeff.
Okay, Tracy, I believe you have some words that
Thank you,
you'd like
Barb.
to share.
I'm sorry.
Hey everybody, I don't know if everybody knows me, Tracy Stoddard, the district nurse. I'm gonna give you a really quick brief update on health services. There is a slide deck that will be available to you for kind of the visuals, and you do have a little handout that's kind of just a one page with those three things. Because I wanna be brief, but I also wanna give you the information that you need. It's typical that I give an end of a year report. So,
Which one?
nope.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
I don't have it, no,
Oh.
yeah, it's,
I
I
know
got
you had
it
it, bro.
really right here. We can skip the slides, no, they're just visuals.
Oh,
So you'll get them when you want, it's not a big deal, I'm just gonna go over this little one-page thing, okay? Is that okay with everybody? Okay, all right. So this always surprises everybody when I say how many health room visits we have. It has increased from 24,000, a little bit over 24,000, the year before last, up to 35,560 visits. So that's amongst our 6 schools and our 6 health rooms, and that sounds like an incredible number. When you do the math, divided by the days, the hours, and the schools, it's still busy, but it's not as much madness as you think it, 35,000 visits would represent. So we did have an increase though in COVID-related visits. That went from the prior year from 647 to 715 this past year. Now, the caveat to that is a specific visit to the health room for somebody that's symptomatic with COVID symptoms that we're gonna process that person. That is not all the testing we do. That is not the administrative work. That is not calling and communicating. And so that is just visits alone related to COVID. And that has gone up. But the other interesting thing to note when I break down these visits is that our behavioral health related visits have also gone up. Now we had 170 in the year prior, and it's up to 354. And again, when I say behavioral health, that means that the primary reason they visited the health room was for a behavioral health need. It was not because they had a stomach ache and then a behavioral health need emerged from that. We see that all the time, but their primary presentation was because of behavioral health. So that is a little bit of a red flag to continue monitoring for me and to kind of break down our health room visits so that we can coordinate with student services and get the kids the help they need. Any questions so far?
Can you expand on that behavioral health? Are you allotting what that is? Is it depression? Is it anorexia?
It's
Is
yeah.
do
It's
you have it regulated
self-identified
out?
by the kids. I don't really drill down. I mean, these 2 years have been difficult. So I would have to look in notes for each one. But what we do try to correlate, and as an aside, if anybody wants some more granular statistics, I can probably put some things together for you. But to your point, if somebody presents with a behavioral health need and they have a pre-existing condition that's been reported by the parents of anxiety or depression or you name it, we kind of correlate those. So we do try to do that. I can get you some numbers for that. But again, what we're trying to do in the health room is to kind of look past what is a kid coming in and just wanting to lay down or having a stomach ache, but they're coming in and they're actually saying, I feel anxious, I feel stressed, I feel depressed. And these kids are so articulate nowadays by stating their emotional state. It's absolutely wonderful that they literally come in and they say that.
Okay, yeah, if you could break it down for me, that would be awesome, because to me, it's like if I was looking at these numbers as a nurse, which I am, I'm gonna be like, okay, if 50% of these kids are saying it's anxiety, then we should, as a district, incorporate some sort of anti-anxiety, help for them, so that they can get through their school day and make sure that they can function so that they can learn, right? And the other thing I'd like to know is this all one person coming in 15 times? Or is it truly an additional 184 kids that are now
These
identified?
are purely just visits, they're not students, but,
We have some data.
yeah. And to that point, we have a lot of data that is not housed within health services, but is housed within student services that we collaborate with them on. So if I really wanted to get, or you really wanted to get a really good perspective as to how many kids have anxiety, depression, that would be more in student services. What I'm doing is looking at this data as an adjunct to that.
Okay.
So that then we can, like you said, start to say, wow, what do we need to, because in another world, we could have health services completely separate from student services, but we know by this data that we have to be together.
Yes.
Does that make sense? But yeah, I can get you some data.
Okay, thanks.
So COVID, I'm gonna mention a few statistics about COVID. And you can kind of read through here, there's one little typo that I will mention to you in a second. So, we had this past school year, 1,388 incidents of isolation. Now, the vectors you can see there, the primary is unknown, which is very typical, 57%. The next is 27% for household, community is 6%, and then lastly is campus. And when I say a campus vector, that means that I was not able to find any other more likely cause for that person becoming isolated than an exposure on campus, a known identified exposure on campus. And then, again, there's a lot of granularity of this, I'm just kind of giving you the high level. We saw the peak in January, as all of us know when we were trying to staff. So I have that visual that you might be interested in. And for quarantines, so remember this year we had optional quarantines. So we did have 2,334 people identified as meeting the criteria for quarantine, and we had 1,830 of them opt out for whatever reason, and that number for students should be 1764. Sorry about that. Spell check, didn't check numbers. And 66 staff that opted out for a variety of reasons. And then we had 504 people opt into a quarantine, 22 of which were staff and 482 of which were students. And again, that granularity as to, was it in the household? Are they staying home, for a child in their quarantining? Did they only have one dose of a vaccine? There are so many variables with this, so again, this is high level, but happy to get you the information. So isolations did increase. We went from 572 to 1,388. So on first glance, that would be, oh my goodness, we had a lot of COVID here. But we started a testing program. Remember that. We did not have testing that first year that was available in the community. So I'm gonna jump down to testing. We did 5,551 PCR tests in this district. That's phenomenal. Our health services staff just did a phenomenal job in getting the tests done. They are all PCRs. We had 2,943, which are what we call our responsive testing program, which is if a person is symptomatic or is a close contact and they're getting tested, versus surveillance, which means they have no other criteria and they're just getting tested. So you can see that data there. There's some vaccine effect that I want to jump down to a little bit because we did have 244 staff that isolated, but out of those 244, 185 were already vaccinated. Now the timing is important as to when some of the COVID variants were coming out, but also we increased our testing. So we're gonna find those people that were asymptomatic. But that is something to consider with vaccines as we kind of caught up to everything. And really, lastly, for outbreaks, we did not have much of a change. We did have, and by outbreak, the definition is 2 or more in a defined area. That does not necessarily mean a classroom if your classroom is spread out the year prior, okay? So within a close contact situation. And that was emerging, evolving definitions. We had 9 in the prior year and 8 in this last year. But what's really significant is that the prior year we quarantined 153 people with those 9, and this year 23. because we were far more focused and surgical in identifying those that may or may not have been close contacts. So that's the high level. Any other questions? Please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I can get you a lot of data. Questions?
Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Carl. So moving on to the final agenda item on the superintendent's report is the report on drug-free school environment. Each year, our high school administrative team presents to the board an end-of-year summary as it relates to our efforts around canine-assisted drug searches as well as the district random drug testing program. So tonight, we have Mr. Irvine, our high school principal.
Would you like to present your slides?
He seems to be searching for something.
Would you like to do that? Okay.
I love having the ability to drive this. So first and foremost, thank you guys for letting me come here tonight. And it is an honor to have Ms. Olson with us again, so I will miss this partner in crime. She's done incredible things here and has been a great partner in this work. So this is our opportunity to provide you and our community with an update of things that have been going on at the high school level regarding drugs and nicotine. I can't say thank you enough to your continued support around this topic. This is a topic that is not going to go away. We have to work together as a community. We have to continue the conversation. We have to talk about it. The game has changed immensely, and if we don't rally together, more and more of our students are going to get addicted to things before they even enter high school. So this is an important opportunity for us, so thank you for that. We continue to do, we strive to have 9 total searches in partnership with our local law enforcement and utilize their canine services. We had 3 outdoor searches where we went through our parking lots. That includes us kind of walking through, and not only does the dog sniff the vehicle, there's also an officer and an administrator who walks by to see if there's perhaps a vaping device sitting on the console, or actually some students actually still smoke cigarettes. We've seen a pack of cigarettes, so that's the visual part of that. We did have 1 canine indication. As a result of that indication, we do search the vehicle. No evidence was found, and we had 3 situations where either the police officer or administrator did see something in the console of the vehicle. We had 6 indoor searches, and those searches we typically do about 6 to 8 classrooms, depending upon the time it takes. We also go through our bathrooms to check to see if students are perhaps hiding things in those spaces and places. We had 4 indications from the canine. As a result of those searches, we do search the student's backpack and persons. We found 0 evidence as a result of those indications. This is just to kind of demonstrate, we try to pay attention to trends. We definitely want to see if things are changing. As you can see, the blue line is the number of indications from the canines. The red are the amount of times where we've actually found evidence on students as a result of those searches. So the game kind of continues to change in how vaping has exploded on the scene. So sometimes students might be around someone who's vaping something, but they leave it at home or they leave it off campus. So sometimes a dog indicates on a student's backpack or their vehicle, but as we search it, we aren't finding the actual physical evidence. So that's the reason where you see no red in those last 2 years. The other component to this approach is the random drug testing. We continue to invest significantly in the opportunity to try to help give our students another reason to say no. So this is any student who's a participant in any co-curricular activities. We administer a full panel to 15 students per month in a test for those chemicals. We also include, out of those 15, 2 students are administered a performance-enhancing drug test as well. The results of these tests, we had out of the 150 students, 21 students tested positive or were considered positive. The reason for that kind of disqualifier, that claim there, is if a student refuses to take a test, our board policy is written in a way that they are then assumed to be positive. So the results had 11 students tested positive for nicotine only. We had 3 students test positive for marijuana only, and 5 test positive for both nicotine and marijuana, and then the 2 refusals. You can see there we had 3 students opt in for the retest in 3 months. That is as a result of the change we moved forward last year in our practice, where when we test students for their parking privileges only, historically they would lose their parking privileges for a full semester, and we wanted to increase the opportunity to have those conversations with the student and the family to help them be informed as to whether or not their student had or hadn't broken that habit. So we now changed the policy to read that a student is suspended from parking privileges for 9 weeks, and then they are re-enrolled into the testing process each month. I'm proud to say that the 3 students that opted to go into that all three tested positive at all three of those tests. So it was something that demonstrated that, at least for these 3 students and families, they engaged in that opportunity, and it helped the family stay informed about whether or not the student was or wasn't engaging in the behavior that got him in trouble in the first place.
Todd? The 2 that refused to provide samples, can we assume that it's students that are either not involved in co-curricular or have parking privileges? Because that's essentially the only effect we can have on them, correct?
No, they are. The only
Yeah.
reason we can test them is because they are part of our co-curricular programming. So they just decided to take the consequences. So sometimes it's a scenario where the student may know that they're going to test positive, and they would rather not have that information, because sometimes students might feel it's maybe less of an issue if I tell my parent I vaped one time and it was just nicotine, and if the test came back and perhaps it was marijuana, it removes a piece of information for the family, so it's unfortunate when it happens.
Okay, thanks.
So Todd, you were saying that after those 3 opted in, they tested positive for the drug?
They never tested
Oh, they
positive.
never
yet.
tested
So-
positive.
So they actually tested negative
Okay.
all 3 months in the follow-up. So of those 3 students, it was a situation where it created a scenario where the families got to hear a very positive call that, hey, we're excited to let you know that your son or your daughter did not test positive this month.
So
and
it's
for all
not
3
a
months.
random thing?
Nope. Well, if they agree to this, they
Yeah,
are stating that.
they have to get tested every,
Yeah,
okay.
the randomness happens, they don't know what day it's gonna happen, it's just once per month. So
Okay.
sometimes it's early in the month, sometimes it's late in the month, sometimes it's a Monday, sometimes it's a Friday.
But it's not like the typical randomness of the drug test?
Correct.
Right.
They know they are going to get
Okay,
tested
that's
each
fine.
month for
Okay.
3 consecutive months.
Got it.
Are the 2 that refused, parents are notified as well?
Correct. Great questions. Again, we try to pay attention to the trends, and this is again something where I just can't say enough about your partnership and the various resources you've helped connect us with, to try to get on the front side. I wish it was as simple as a suspension or losing your parking privileges or an athletic code violation would change this behavior. Our data is telling it that it's not that easy. We have to continue to work and partner with students to understand, how do I overcome these addictions? Students still have this perception sometimes that nicotine and vaping isn't really a big deal. Then all of a sudden they get themselves in trouble and they realize they're really struggling to quit the habit. So we've really tried to shift our practices to create some sort of approaches around how do we educate the students and the families about the significance of this and provide them something other than just a nicotine ticket. So that's where, again, really appreciative for the partnership, the AODA grants, and the ability to have some mental health providers in our school has allowed some of our students to talk with a professional and address that addiction issue. Where again, they once would say that, oh, it's just vaping, it's just something I did on the weekend, I was just at a party. Well, okay, I can as a parent believe that one time, but then if my student stumbles again, or I choose to test them at home, which is what we encourage every parent, if your student makes a mistake, be informed, continue to trust but verify. So again, huge thanks to the partnership on that. Some of the other things we've done, we continue to try to share information. Our health teachers have been great partners. They continue to try to stay on the front side of what the research is showing as far as the harmful effects, because we have to counteract that aspect of many students just believe it's not harmful at all. We have included the nicotine to our random drug testing panel to help our parents be more informed. The detour program is an opportunity to reduce the number of days suspended, providing the student and the family engage in an educational program. Because again, I'd love to tell you we just suspend a kid for 3 days and they'd stop vaping. That isn't the case. Hopefully we can get them the education to understand the risks associated with this to help them make some healthier decisions. Can't say enough about our Muskego Police Department and their partnership in this, whether it's through the canines or the searches. They are incredibly skilled at the rapport and connecting with both students and families and helping them understand the harmful consequences as well. A shift this year is we have been able to utilize metal detector wands, so it does help us be less invasive. If a student has been indicated on, we can simply go through with a wand. This may be shocking where students typically hide their vapes. It's not necessarily just in their pockets. It may be in their underwear or their bra, so it's not something that as an administrative team we ever conduct a physical search. That would always be turned over to the police department. But again, it's a lot easier to just use a wand detector that makes a sound when there's a metal object in a place that it probably shouldn't have a metal object. And then the final thing we do, we continue to administer random breathalyzing at all of our school dances. So again, I'd love to tell you that we are on the front side of this and we are making great headway. Though our data shows kind of a flat line, it's a problem that isn't going to go away. And we have to continue every single year to invest in the partnership with our families and our students and talk about why this is a life-changing decision and help them make healthier decisions. Questions?
Mr. Irvine, I have to ask, so is there anything else we can do to
And
support you?
I love that, I feel like every time I'm asked that question by our school board, I genuinely believe that that is the approach of our school board and our community. I wish I had that answer. We're gonna continue to try to research what's happening in other spaces and places. We partner with all the other Waukesha County schools to talk about if someone is making headway or there's a change in the practices or what they're seeing in students. But at this time, we don't have a request.
And I ask that because not just for the board, but for the parents too, and that since we began this program, increased the percent and then included parking in there as well. It's been extremely successful. And so, yeah, I just want to keep that on the center point that if there's anything we can do outside the box, we want to know. And
I appreciate that. I do feel like some of it is getting traction, like some of the program offerings in the evening to help educate parents. That word is slowly starting to get out because again, it's something that just honestly I feel like caught society sleeping. There was a pandemic going on and students were kind of at home for a long stretch of time and were struggling with that time and knowing what to do. And we had a lot of great kids start to make some bad decisions and now we have to circle around as a community and as partners and get on the front side of this to help our kids be healthy and safe.
So, Mr. Irvine, to piggyback off of what Mr. Buckmaster said, if you hear anything from our school resource officers as well, that they say, hey, I wish we had X, Y, and Z, that's something that we'd like to hear.
Appreciate it.
I don't know if a lot of you guys know this, but Todd spoke last year at our pediatric conference at Children's on vaping, which was phenomenal for our staff to be able to hear what he's seen in the school district and what is happening out there. And I appreciated that you were able to team up with Dr. Diaz and talk about the problem vaping is with these kids. And I also appreciate that you don't just penalize, that you use some sort of incentive to help them get through the problem, because it's hard.
I appreciate, someone made a statement earlier that just echoed in my heart. Kids want to make good decisions, kids want to be successful, and it is heart-wrenching when you're sitting with a young adult who knows it's not healthy. They know they are not okay with the decisions and the outcome, but they are genuinely struggling to break the habit. So the partnership is incredibly important, so thank you for that. And that was another great example of the board. It was an honor for me to be a part of that, but I learned a ton from Dr. Diaz. We had one of the national experts on this working with us, where I was learning a ton from her, so very cool stuff. Yes, sir.
Hey, Todd, before I ask my question, I just want to say I appreciate that you get the parents involved, even on the hits that don't turn out positive, because I think it's important that, you know, they understand that their kid may be involved either with the wrong people or maybe doing something that they're just clever enough not to get caught at least the conventional ways. But my question is, with the last 2 years where we haven't had any physical hits from the canine searches, do you see that as a positive, that the kids are not, at least not bringing the drugs into school, or at least it's less pervasive than it has been in the past? I mean, that would be a good inroad. I mean, it's not perfect, but at least if it's not in the school, or if there are fewer spots in the school, fewer people they can approach, the better. Is that an accurate assessment?
Great question. I want to believe that's the case. There has been situations where sometimes vaping cartridges with THC, if they're brand new, may not have scent yet. So there could be scenarios where a student has it on their persons when the dogs come through a classroom, or so there are scenarios where I hope that that's the case, but I can't say with 100% certainty that that is the case. I appreciate the random drug testing data points. That kind of helps because it is concrete evidence whether or not a student does or doesn't have THC in their persons. So,
And do you think the random drug tests we have, is that sufficient? Or should we up them at some point in the future?
great question. So we do speak with our counterparts and take a look at the percentage of students we test. and ask that question, is what is the right number of students to send that ripple effect of having a student think twice about an unhealthy decision out of concern that, hey, I might get called next week and it might cost me my parking permit or a chance to compete in our cross-country program or insert whatever variable. We feel like we are testing an adequate amount. It's this fine balance of, as Mr. Badlenko knows, we go and we pull a student out of AP US History, and then we pull a student out of CAP Chemistry, and we pull a student out of AP Calc. We're pulling great kids out of important learning opportunities, so we're constantly trying to balance that loss of instructional time with trying to send a message of, this is an important thing. We want to help families stay informed. We want them to have the information if their student is perhaps getting on a path where they're making unhealthy decisions. Because it really does, you made a statement before, it's, I would love to tell you this is a bad kid thing. This isn't every kid thing. In every community we speak with, it's not bad kids vaping, it's every kid, every demographic, every SES status. Vaping has absolutely taken the younger generation as a wave, and we have to continue to help every family. As a parent myself, it's heart-wrenching to me how students talk about vaping and their lack of understanding about the long-term effects. So the more we can do to continue to make it a topic of conversation when you're sitting at home at the dinner table and asking the questions, because sometimes students aren't always as honest as we would like them to be when they're talking about unhealthy decisions. So helping add another layer of information can be really important.
Todd, do you know of the positives that you had, how many are freshmen?
Not off the top of my head, but we do have that breakdown.
Because I was just curious,
Yeah.
do we look at
Yeah.
doing 8th graders? I don't know. Yes. It's a thought.
I think it's a wonderful question. As a high school administrator, I don't feel like it's my place to say.
Right.
I do know there are some surrounding districts that do that. I do think the data now would suggest that most students start prior to high school. And we have seen an increase of positive tests with our freshmen. So,
Yeah,
Are you talking more the vaping and the nicotine or the full spectrum?
I think the whole thing, yeah, unfortunately. I think a lot of the kids don't even realize that they have THC. I don't know, maybe the SRO could talk about it, but I don't even know if they know that what they're vaping. Sometimes, I don't know if they know exactly what's in it.
thank you guys for your questions and your support around this.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Irvine. And that being said, that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Moving on to item 4, other reports, President's report. Other than we have school starting in September, the board will go on its break after today through up until late August. That's all I have. Board member reports. Mrs. Blair.
Yeah, the only one with the attention.
I'm just gonna go right to you as our CISA rep, so.
I know, I did put in your links, the CISA upcoming events and what's out there. They did say to me that the ESSER funds are depleting or going away, so if there's any of those programs, you might want to take advantage of those sooner than later, because they're probably not going to be. There may be some, especially some that are very productive and very good, but not all will be there.
Thank you for providing the links too,
Yeah,
because
they do that
that's
for me.
very good. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I requested it and they obliged.
It's a lot easier to sift through it, so
Yeah.
thanks. Any other board member reports? Mrs. Connie? Mr. Zimmerman?
No.
Mr. Bowman?
No.
Mrs. Boyer?
No.
Mr. Hyde?
I did, in August 8th and 9th, I was at the WSB Summer Leadership Conference. I did email out my report to everyone on the board. If there's any questions, feel free to ask. Basically, the theme was, after 2 years of COVID, we need to focus on student achievement. And how do we do that?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hyde. Committee reports, we have none. Moving on, item 5, resolution action items. Item A, Fund 46 transfer.
Motion to approve the transfer of $990,242 and any other unexpected Fund 10 funds from Fund 10 to Fund 46.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any questions about what we're doing, or is the narrative fine? We're good, right?
Yep.
We're letting Julie off easy.
Sorry, Julie.
Good?
All right, hearing none. All those in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
It's really a result of all your pre-work. We're starting our new fiscal year, all that stuff, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on, item 5B, gifts, grants, and bequests.
Motion to approve with thanks the following donations for the Best Buddies, Jeffrey and Christine Lehrman, $50 to Muskego High School Best Buddies chapter, and $50 to the Lake Dunoon Middle School Best Buddies chapter, and the Muskego High School CNA Lab, Brenda Duke, HR Director at Lakeview Specialty Hospital, 2 hospital beds and 4 hospital tables for the Muskego High School CNA Lab.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Thank you very much. Okay, all those in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Moving on, item 6. You have 2022-23 preliminary budget. Julie.
Can't get away on this one.
Now you cannot get away on this one, sorry.
Okay, so there are 2 attachments in board docs for your review. And again, what we're doing is we're looking at the 22-23 preliminary budget and tax levies. So we'll start with the preliminary budget. In March, you approved the budget assumptions that we made. We have made some tweaks to those assumptions. For example, our health insurance renewal rates. Because of the things that we have in place and how we're running as a self-funded group, we don't have an increase in our health insurance rates. We were able to save on those assumptions. As far as what's presented to you here, we always looked at the 3 scenarios of increasing 50 students, remaining flat, or decreasing 50 students. The decreasing students 50 FTEs for the upcoming year gives us the most conservative estimate on the tax levy, so I moved forward with that assumption. Obviously, our student count doesn't come in until the 3rd Friday in September, so we don't have that actual until September, but we will move forward with the preliminary budget using that FTE of losing 50 FTE. We know that we're not getting a per pupil increase or a categorical increase from the state. We have made an assumption of an equalized valuation growth of 5%. We've seen that above 5% in the past, but that gives us a conservative estimate to make sure that we're on target for a mill rate. As far as our general fund, we're presenting a balanced budget of just over 61.1 million. And that assumes that our fund balance will remain as is. Our tax levy is estimated at this time to go down by 0.11%. What that does is that does give us $125,000 in additional levy to put into the debt service fund for defeasance in the future. And again, all of these numbers are preliminary and we don't get our final numbers until October 15th. But if in fact we don't lose 50 students and we remain flat, we could put up to $300,000 back into the debt service fund. So we continue to operate knowing that we want to defease debt and we'll continue to levy accordingly. That gives us a decrease in our mill rate of just under 5%, which is what, as we went through the referendum process, we had talked about how we would still see a decreasing levy even with our referendum principal and interest payments put into the equation. And so you'll see our referendum debt levy is included there, and so we are operating with a decreasing levy for the 12th year in a row and a balanced budget. If you go into the next attachment, that's the preliminary tax levy and mill rate as it's broken down for you. Our general fund levy is listed there as well as our capital expansion. Again, Fund 41 allows us to amortize some of the cost of our bigger projects. So we like to allocate funds specifically for capital projects into that levy. Those 2 together are our general operations levy. If we didn't allocate that $750 in capital expansion, it would stay in the general fund. We have our referendum approved debt service, including the new debt from the recently passed referendum. Something new that you'll see this year is a small levy for our community service fund. If you remember, we kind of moved away from the community service fund. We still operate though some community service programs such as Open Swim. We need to pay for lifeguards and for management of some of those items. We have used up all fund balance that we can, and so there's a small levy in here to just continue to operate that accordingly. And then our property tax chargeback is what we are allowed to put back on the levy because we didn't receive it from taxpayers this current year. It's just over $4,000. So again, we're looking at a $30.2 million tax levy, which is a 0.11% decrease. And then the details of the equalized valuation as well as the mill rate analysis is listed below. So next steps then in August, we'll bring forward the details behind all of these numbers. We'll include all of our funds, so you'll see the special ed, the food service, and our other remaining funds. We'll include the revenues and expenses for that. And we'll update any numbers as they become more available, but remember, we can't do our final numbers until our equalized valuation is certified by the Department of Revenue at the beginning of October. We get our final September 3rd count to be able to get our actual FTE count for students. And then we have our October 15th equalization aid number that will come in October. So we'll use this budget as we move forward into the annual meeting. The details are brought forward in August and October, and then after the October annual meeting, 5 minutes later, we'll have the updated numbers for you, and you'll approve that for our budget moving forward.
Any questions or comments?
The state budget is on the,
We're in the second year of the biennial,
Okay.
so we know what we're getting, well, we have an estimate of what we're getting from the state, because the state numbers are determined by how much each school district spends. So there's that factor in there that we have to worry about, but aside from that, we know
okay,
essentially what we're
because I
getting.
didn't know if it was affected by the November election and stuff, but that should have already been pre-approved, right?
Yeah, we won't
Right.
know the budget for 23, 24, 24, 25.
Okay.
Anything else? You'll see this on the agenda going forward with any tweaks and changes, and they'll be noted, and you can track it as we go forward. Works out great. So, thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's see here. All right, moving on, item 7. You have A, B, and C, or A are financials, B, personal information memo. I have no communications, and miscellaneous business is authorized by law. At this time, having no other business before this board, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So,
Second.
All those in favor, state by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
it's one thing more, right?